When there's a bump in the night in Afghanistan, civilians are afraid, and with good reason. Night raids, secret prisons, and disappearances are becoming common in the country. But the kidnappers were supposed to be the Afghans' protectors. They're American troops. Well, with me now to talk more about this is Anand Gopal. He's in studio, and he's a reporter who's covered this on the ground. Thank you so much for being here. Now, it's rare to be able to speak with someone who's actually spent time closely covering this, who's seen the things on the ground that you have seen, secret prisons, the people that have been affected by them in Afghanistan, as opposed to pundits far away in a studio. Tell us about your experience covering this story.
Well, across the countryside, one of the things that's really bred a lot of resentment and hatred amongst Afghans is the practice of U.S. soldiers going into people's homes in the middle of the night and taking away their loved ones, often on the slightest of suspicions. And often these people are taken into a series of prisons across the country, and sometimes they're released, sometimes they're held indefinitely. And it's really turned a lot of people against the Americans.
Tell us a specific story that really stuck with you that illustrates what you're talking about.
Well, there's a person named Karar who's an Afghan government employee, and he's somebody who's gone on TV many times defending the Afghan government and defending the coalition forces. Now, Special Operations Forces came into his home one day about a couple of months ago. They killed two of his relatives, and they took two other ones away. The family still doesn't know what's happened to one of the relatives. They've put out advertisements. They've asked other government officials to find him, and nobody knows where he's gone. And, you know, I've talked to Karar after the incident, and he tells me that, you know, before I was a big supporter of the government and of the coalition forces, but now I don't know why I should support them if they can't even tell me what's happened to my relative.
And is that a sentiment that is widespread, or is this limited to a few people that have been affected?
It's widespread, especially in those areas where the fighting is actually happening, the south and the east of the country. 7, 8 years ago, people greeted Americans as liberators of the country, but now the tide is turning, unfortunately, because of a lot of these military actions.
Well, to play devil's advocate, aren't they necessary in this kind of U.S. effort, in this kind of a war that they're fighting? Is it possible to have a war like this without a Bagram prison, without these counter-terror methods?
Well, that's what the soldiers argue, that you can't fight a counterterrorism war without night raids, just as you can't fight them without bullets. It's essential. But a lot of Afghans will say to that, well, then we don't want the soldiers there if that's going to be the conditions in which the war is being fought.
What do you think after covering this? What do you think the answer is?
Well, I think I agree with many Afghans that the war ultimately has needs a political solution, not a military solution. And if you talk to Afghans, they say again and again they want all the warring sides to come and sit at the negotiating table and try to come up a way to come up with a peace plan instead of continuing to fight a war that's been fought for 7 or 8 years at this point.
Do you think that's possible, though, with Afghanistan's history?
It's possible.
Of civil war,
yeah,
of fighting?
It's not easy, certainly. But what Afghans often say is that it's more of an emphasis. When the emphasis is placed on actually trying to negotiate instead of continuing to fight the war and increasing the number of troops there, then we'll start to see, we could start to see differences. But right now, a lot of Afghans feel frustrated because they haven't seen a shift in emphasis in U.S. policy in that regard. Really
quickly, we've heard so much about Gitmo over the past year, but Bagram is just starting to surface in reports like yours. What effect is Bagram having on the U.S. effort? Why don't we hear about Bagram?
Well, Bagram is sort of tucked away. You know, Gitmo's close to the country. Bagram's in the middle of a war zone, so people don't really know what's going on there. It's very secretive. But for Afghans, Bagram is their Gitmo in many ways, because the prisoners who are taken end up there, and many of them don't have any lawyers. They're not there with any trial. They're just kept there indefinitely.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories from the ground in Afghanistan and telling us about the counter-terror efforts that are going on but aren't really discussed.